And so at the very top is the set of recommendations, and this is it. So it's not too detailed, but let's take a look at each one of these lines. A fully qualified namespace and class must have the following structure: vendor name, namespace, class name. So the vendor name is what we've been calling third party in our third party library, and what we've called BAM in our own classes. And then the class name is just the name of the class, for example, builder or form or validator. And namespace is anything that you want that's in between these two things. So we've been using OOP example site for ours, and we also used OOP example site /page for a couple of our classes. And then our third party uses utilities. So what we've done so far meets this standard. The next recommendation is that each namespace must have a top level namespace, which is what we've done already. Each namespace can have as many subnamespaces as it wishes. So again, that's what's included right here in between. Each namespace separator is converted to a directory separator when loading from the file system. Okay, so this is where things deviate from what we've done so far. At this point, what we've done is completely ignored everything except the class name when it comes to our file directory structure. If we go back to the file browser, now we've moved our validator class for the third party into this set of subfolders, so things are going to be a little bit different. And we've actually rebuilt our autoloader in order to take this into account. So I'm going to open up index.php again. And here's our new autoloader. It's a little bit longer than it was before. But let's grasp what it's doing right now, and we'll come back to the PSR-0 standards. So these first 2 bits of code have to do with going through our entire code base and looking for folders called lib. We're going to assume that anything in lib includes properly namespaced classes. So when it goes through our directories right now, what it's going to see is 2 folders called lib. It's going to see the main lib directory, and then it's going to see another lib directory, which includes the third-party utilities validator. So this is the lib directory supplied by the third-party vendor. Now the idea again here is that if all of our third-party code follows this type of standard, then we'll be able to use this autoloader for all of it. But because the vendor folders all have different names and their names that we gave it, we can't anticipate what those are going to be, but we can anticipate what's going to be in the lib folder. So that's why we're going through and finding all the lib folders, because we're assuming that from the lib folder, we can then derive the location of the file for the class simply by looking at the namespace. And if that sounds confusing, don't worry about it. This is going to take just a little bit to sink in probably. Okay, I'm going to jump back to the index.php file. So this first bit of code might look a little scary because it involves the recursive iterator and recursive directory iterator, which are a couple of additional classes that come with PHP 5.3. All this is going to generate a list of directories, and we're looking in the dir. And so this is the location of our index.php file, and it returns this set of directories. Then we're going to loop through all those directories, pull out the directory. The directory is actually an object that includes several useful methods, one of which is getFileName. And if the file name is lib, then what we're going to do is add it to this list of prefixes. Now this could be called file prefixes or directories or something else, but we're using prefixes because you're going to see that same name in other standard autoloaders that exist out there. So what we're adding is the full path, which you can get by using the getPath method on the directory object, and then we're adding back the lib folder. So by the time we get to here, what we have is a set of prefixes or directories where the lib folders are, and there should be 2 of them. One, if we go back to the file browser, in our lib folder, and the other one in our third party in vendor. Let's jump back to the editor. Okay. So now we're going to loop through each of the prefixes. Now remember that we have been given a namespace. And if we're going to look at our third-party namespace, I'm going to jump over to validator. It's going to be third-party/utilities. Let's assume that that's the one we're trying to autoload right now. I'm going to go back to our index file. And so we're going to generate a potential file name. So we'll grab the prefix, and then we'll add it to the namespace, but we're going to replace all of the backslashes with forward slashes, which is a directory separator. So if we jump back to the browser and continue looking at these standards under PSR-0, this next part here says each namespace separator is converted to directory separator when loading from the file system. And that's the part that we're doing right now. So I'm going to go back to the editor. So we replace the full namespace with these forward slashes and then add a .php. So what this will look like is the full directory to the lib folder, and then third party / utilities / validator.php. And if we go back to our file system, you see that we have that exact structure here. So that file definitely exists. If we go back to our editor, the next part is checking to see if that file exists. Now we have two prefixes, so one of the prefixes is going to work, one of the prefixes is not. We check to see if the file exists. If so, we include it, and then we return this because we don't need to loop through these anymore. But we're going to start having problems when we try to autoload our own because we're not following the standard so far. So if we jump back to the browser and we go back to our Contact Us page and we refresh, it says class BAM OOP example site builder not found. If we did a quick debugging session here just to take a look at what happens when we get to this point in the code, let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go back to the browser and turn on debugging and then refresh. And I'm going to jump back to the editor. So we've stopped the progress of the script right here. And so we're looping through each of the prefixes. If we go through the prefixes and we expand it here, you see we have two of them. The first one, if we hover over it, is to our lib folder in examples/oop/lib. The second one is the one to our third party. It's examples/oop lib vendor third party lib. So the first time this goes through, if we go ahead and step in, watch that yellow arrow, it's going to build the file name. If we hover over here, we can see the full file name. It's looking in lib bam oop example site /builder. And it doesn't exist there because it's actually in the lib folder. So as we step in again, it's going to check to see if the file exists, and it's not going to. So it's going to go for the second prefix and see if it's there. And that's the third party folder. So if we look at the file name that it's looking for here, you can see that it's third party /lib band OOP example site /builder. And it's definitely not going to be found in there either. So if we step in again and step one more time, that's when we get the fatal error because we're trying to call a class that just doesn't exist. Okay, so just for completeness, let's finish taking a look at the PSR-0 standards. So we just dealt with this namespace separator converted to a directory separator when loading from the file system, which basically means that our namespace is being converted to actual directories. And our code doesn't follow this, though the third-party code does. This next line is each underscore character in the class name is converted to a directory separator. So luckily in Drupal 8, we don't have to deal with this. There's nothing that uses underscores in the class names. And in general, we don't need to use underscores inside of our class names. So you can avoid having to deal with this. But just keep in mind that if you do use an underscore, it's going to look for your class in additional subfolders based on what's before those underscores. That is, if we're following the PSR-0 standard, or using an autoloader that is PSR-0 compliant. So this next line is the fully qualified namespace and class is suffixed with .php when loading from the file system. So everything that we built so far ends in .php, so we're good to go there. And finally it says alphabetic characters and vendor names, namespaces, and class names may be of any combination of lowercase and uppercase. So we can freely do what we want to there, but we are following a set of conventions to make sure that we're consistent.